All right, Flyers back in action tonight. They've been busy. They got the Panthers again tonight after losing to the Islanders the other night. You can listen to the game in progress on 97.3 ESPN. If you have perused the standings for the Philadelphia Flyers, they might be a little confusing for you if you haven't paid attention to the NHL the way they changed their playoffs a couple of years ago. But the other day, the Flyers were in after the loss the other night to the Islanders, which could have really firmly put them in. They are in, but they're in a different spot. They are the second wildcard team right now. Columbus is ahead of them. The Islanders are the third team in the Metro. Pittsburgh second, Washington first. And the Flyers with 69 points would make them the second wildcard team, just 1 point ahead of Toronto and 3 points ahead of tonight's opponent, the Florida Panthers. The Flyers will visit Sunrise tonight, and it's a very important game. They all are. Kevin Durso covers the Flyers for 97.3 ESPN.com. Kevin, just how important is a game like tonight where you're playing a team behind you in the standings, and we saw the Flyers, they have not played in these particular games their best. They've had some ugly, bad losses. The Devils lost. Voracek brought it up after that game that, he was scoreboard watching, and that's a bad loss. That would not be good to duplicate that tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two ways to look at this particular game tonight. The first is exactly like you said. It's a team behind you in the standings, and not just a team behind you like where the Devils are, but a team that's right on your heels. So losing this game in regulation is terrible. Losing it in overtime is not great. You really need to come away with 2 points here to create some separation. So there's maybe one fewer team that's breathing down your neck that you don't have to be watching for as these games move on. The other reason is because arguably you're coming off of your toughest loss of the season. There's really no other way to put it. You work your way back from a 3-0 deficit in Tuesday's game against the Islanders, only to give up the game-winning goal in the final minute a matter of seconds later from tying the game. So you come away with no points when you could have had at least one, maybe two, with the way the game was shaping up. So it's important for two reasons. One, you can create some separation, and the other is that you've really got to try to avenge that loss on Tuesday night where you felt like you deserved a lot better for the comeback you had.
Yeah, and you have the Islanders playing tonight. The Blue Jackets have it back-to-back against Carolina, and then they play the Devils. So they have a chance to rack up some points here as well. So every point is very magnified at this stage of the season. So they just played the Panthers Monday night. How do they match up, and how did that game go? Do you anticipate a similar style tonight?
Well, if they play with a bit of a similar style, it could go a similar way, and that would be a good thing for the Flyers. The worry I have with this is that Florida really was talking a lot after that game about how they didn't feel like they brought their best. Once again, it was kind of a start where the Flyers didn't get off to their best and improved as the game went on. They really can't afford to do that tonight. It's a matter of the last couple of games, the Florida's top line, which is very good, has two proven all-stars on it to begin with. In Jonathan Huberdeau and Alexander Barkov. Those are guys who were held scoreless in the game against the Flyers on Monday and held scoreless in their last game also on Tuesday. So it's a rare feat for them to go 2 games in a row without scoring. Huberdeau had a chance right at the side of the net that would have cut the Flyers' lead down to 1 in the final minute of Monday's game, and it led to Claude Giroux's empty net goal that put the game away. So they were close on a lot of chances, and the Flyers in that game in particular played maybe a little bit too loosely defensively. They were giving up a lot of odd-man rushes. You can't afford to do that on the road against a team with this much talent up front. They will make you pay for it this time around, I think. So tightening up defensively is absolutely imperative in this game.
Talking with Kevin Durso. Follow him at Kevin Durso for your Flyers tonight. They take on the Florida Panthers. Let me ask you, there's only, 25 games or so left for the Flyers. I mean, the season is winding down here, but the trade deadline is still not here. It's very deep in the NHL season. What are we hearing? What do we know on that front? For them to make a tweak, make a move so late in the year. I mean, I'm surprised how late the deadline is with so few games to implement that new player.
Yeah, it is very late in the year, and the thing about the deadline being that late is there's still a week and a half until the deadline hits, so not a lot of teams are really rushing to get anything done, it seems. I mean, there's a lot of teams in the league that are in a playoff position anyway, so they're kind of evaluating themselves before they determine whether they're going to be buyers or sellers or make that one tweak that makes the difference for them. The one trade that was kind of memorable was Pittsburgh just picked up Jason Zucker from Minnesota, and that was the one big move that's been made pre-deadline so far. But a lot of the activity looks like it's going to wait until maybe that final weekend. But in terms of the Flyers being active on that front, I'm not really hearing a whole lot. Again, with the cap space they have, it's not really an option for them to go out and just make them whatever move they want to. There's going to have to be a lot of thinking behind it. And they really don't have a way to address any need with the cap space the way it is. They're going to have to get creative for sure. Obviously, the big addition they could make is they could just find a way. If there's a way for Nolan Patrick to be healthy enough to return in the last part of the season, you could pick up some really big center depth there, but he's only gotten through so many practices in a row. He just finally returned to some regular practice time last week. He didn't make the trip to Florida with the team, but that's not really a big deal at this stage of his progress at this point. Just the fact that he practiced with the team a couple of times is significant enough, considering a few weeks ago it looked like he was going to end up getting shut down. So that's about as far as they could take some things with the deadline unless they get really creative.
So what do you credit, Kevin, the Flyers and their slow starts? They've allowed 44 first-period goals when they're on the road. That's most in the NHL. The next worst is 33, I believe, by the New Jersey Devils. They're also below 500 on the road. So I don't know what it is with the Wells Fargo Center this year between the Sixers and the Flyers, but the struggles on the road seem to haunt this team as well, the Flyers. So how do they fix those things?
I think it's just about being ready from the jump every single time. You've got to come out and play with the same energy that you play the second and third periods. Realistically, I don't think that their slow starts is something that's exclusive to the road necessarily. They played a few games at home where they come out and they don't look like the team that they do in those last two periods. And the big difference is they find a way to survive the first period, either maybe in a tie game, maybe they score on a power play late, and you take a 1-0 lead out of the first period, and you didn't really play your best, but you have the lead or you're tied, and the entire game's right in front of you. When they play on the road, whether it's a matchup issue because you get the last change or you don't get the last change, I should say, and there's a lot of little things like that can come into play, but for whatever reason, they are getting burned on more of those chances that they give up in the slow starts. So they've come out on the road and had games where they've fallen behind 2-0 and 3-0 relatively easily in some of those games. You look at Tuesday against the Islanders, they really just weren't playing up to the speed of the Islanders at all. Not playing quickly, not really playing with the speed they need, and it turned into a 3-0 deficit after the first period that they had to work their almost the entire rest of the game to get back from before ultimately losing the game in the final minute. So you can't have those slow starts and really be considered a huge threat. And for whatever reason, they do survive them on home ice, but on the road, it's been a big problem, and it's something that they need to put away pretty quickly, because a lot of their big games are going to come on the road. And they've got big ones at home too, but a lot of them are going to come on the road, and they're specifically ones like tonight. You play Tampa on Saturday. Columbus is on the road next week is one of the two against Columbus. So a lot of big games on the road where you've got to figure things out quickly and get off to really good starts to kind of put that to rest.
A lot of big games coming up. We're talking with Kevin Durso, 97.3 Flyers Insider. Now, with those big games coming up, and I'm looking down the road a little bit here, but are you confident that if they can just be clicking at the right time and maybe go into the playoffs, hopefully, fingers crossed, on somewhat of a hot streak, that they can maybe make some noise? Like, what's the landscape of the potential playoff pitcher? Are you confident that they could maybe make a run despite being a lower seed?
Yeah, I am, and I think the big reason I am is because of the way that they played that Washington game last Saturday. To come out and play the top team in the division and really take it to them for the better part of the last 40 minutes of the game is exactly the way you would need to play in a playoff series. And if I look at the way they've played Washington the entire year as a team. Washington's probably going to end up running away with the division. Pittsburgh's kind of hanging in there, but I don't really see anybody being a threat to Washington for the division title. So if they're the division winner, a wild card team's going to go and play Washington, and the Flyers have been able to skate with them for all three games that they've played. They lost one of them in a shootout, which was close the entire way. It was a 2-1 final, and they've won the other two. So I think that's significant how they do get up for the games against the big opponents and seem to play pretty well in most of those games. Hold for the Islanders game on Tuesday where they got off to just a terrible start. But those are the things I look at. I do see how they have that ability to compete, and quite honestly, going back to the previous point about slow starts, if they could figure out a way to put it together in the first period as they do in the second and third and play complete games with more consistency, they're a tough team to beat when they play that style for upwards of 50 to 60 minutes a game. They're really tough to beat because they're tough to move off the puck, and they actually come at you with some pretty decent speed. So those things are proved to be, in my mind, reasons to be confident about the team. It's just a matter of finding that consistency, which is certainly a reason to doubt that confidence.
All right, Kevin Durso, Flyers tonight against the Panthers. Let me ask you about Carter Hart. I know Elliott played well, and I don't want to take anything away from what he did while Hart was out, but how much difference and how much of a difference maker is Hart? How different is the team with Hart?
I think the difference with Carter Hart, and it applies to Brian Elliott in some cases as well, but mainly with Hart, and I thought it was pretty significant in Monday's game. This is his first action in roughly close to a month at this point, at least 4 weeks, and he comes into a game. He gave up a goal early. I think it might have been the first shot of the game that Florida took. But after that, he locks it down, and you can tell he's on his game. And when he locks it down like that, it becomes pretty apparent that even the chances that look like they're threatening are not getting by him. And he's able to make 30 saves in a game and make it look somewhat relatively easy at that point. So that's what I think he brings. He brings a certain confidence about his own game and his own individual preparation that when he's on, the rest of the team starts to, I think, feel like they're a little bit bulletproof to a sense. You know, where if they've got him back there making all those saves, then they feel like they can play their game and take advantage of the opportunities that they get in front of him to put up a few goals, and that's how you build, 2-1, 3-1 lead against a team like Florida, who had been playing pretty well leading into that game, and you're able to build a lead and you're able to hold on to it because you know you've got that stability and goal behind them. Brian Elliott's had that at times in games as well, but in situations like, say, Tuesday's game where you feel like you need a save that stops the bleeding at some point, whether it's one of the goals in the first period, which all were pretty tough ones to stop from his vantage point, or the one at the end, which he could have made a play on. Sometimes when you need that save, you need to feel like that guy is invincible behind you. And Carter Hart brings that element. Sometimes he might not get shutouts a lot in this league so far, but he has games where only one beats him, and that might be something that's crazy circumstance, a bad deflection or a bounce off of a skate that he's unable to stop. But most of the time, when he gets locked in, the things that are routine are the things that are stopped, and that's what you need out of your goaltender.
Let me get your take on the defensive pairings and what is, in your opinion, because Gostisbehere has been kind of in and out. We know he gives offense, but very inconsistent defense, and he's kind of been in and out. And what is their best pairings, do you think, as you've seen this team essentially all season long? It seems like that is still a spot that is, they're still tinkering with.
It is to an extent. I think they've very clearly established that they want the first pairing to be Ivan Provorov and Matt Niskanen, and I certainly agree with that pairing. Niskanen really brings such a good veteran presence that Provorov's able to play his game with so much more confidence in his own abilities, and Niskanen doesn't really have to do doesn't have to do as much. Provorov is becoming such a stud on the back end that Niskanen just serves as a second kind of stability there, and he's able to be really strong defensively as a result. So Niskanen's been a great addition to the blue line, particularly with Provorov. And lately, they've really found some good rhythm with the last pairing, the third pairing of Robert Haig and Justin Braun. They're not two guys that were playing together previously at any point during the year until Braun came back from injury a few weeks ago, but they've been solid the whole way. Robert Haig is really filled in admirably when asked to. He's been asked to play some significant games in the last little while with Gostisbehere being out of the lineup, and to the Flyers' credit, it hasn't hurt them in the least. He actually jumped up on a play and scored on a rebound in the last game on Tuesday. So for him to be able to be such a solid presence and round out that third pairing in a way, and they both are not really the offensive-minded type. They're more stay-at-home, but when they get put on the ice in certain situations, I saw a lot of people arguing that maybe they should have been the pairing on the ice for that last shift against the Islanders where you get scored on, and not the other pairing that was on the ice that we'll talk about, which is Travis Sanheim and Phil Myers. I think Sanheim is kind of an in-between. He has his moments where he looks like a true stud on the blue line as well, good offensive abilities and can make some good defensive plays, and then there's others where he makes a bad read and he gets burned from it. Phil Myers is very much still learning the game and learning what he can and can't get away with at the NHL level. Some of the things that I noticed, he'll tend to follow the puck a little too much. He did it on the game-winning goal that the Islanders scored on Tuesday, where he didn't have to trail the player who's carrying the puck in that spot, but he does. He pinches a lot in situations where he maybe shouldn't and should stay back to be that stability. In the back end, when Travis Sanheim is jumping up on a play, And so that's mistakes that are made too. The Islanders scored a goal on Tuesday on a 2-on-1 where Scott Lawton was the one guy back, not a defenseman. So those are the growing pains that you have with these two players. What they do bring is great size and great skating ability. Both are very good at that, but they do still have a lot of areas for improvement, and they're getting trusted with a lot of minutes. If there's any pairing that I could see getting kind of rotated around a little bit in the near future, it probably is that one, because I think the Flyers really like what they have out of the top pairing, and I think they like what they have out of Braun and Haig, but I think it's that middle one that has some growing pains that leaves a little to be desired.
So what's Gostisbehere's role, future? I mean, is he kind of in limbo?
He is kind of at this point, I would say. I don't think anything's going to happen differently for the rest of this season. I think that the amount of time he's missed doesn't really make him valuable to anybody else around the league at the time. You would end up selling really low on him if you did. So I don't see that being a thing, but I wouldn't be surprised if his name comes up in conversations in the offseason, mainly because, again, it's because of what Robert Haig has done. And that's not to say that players like Robert Haig aren't all over the place around the league. They are. But he's done such a good job from a stability standpoint that you've kind of seen what life without Shayne Gostisbehere is like over the course of the last few weeks. You get a sense that this team has the ability to survive without him, and if they feel they have the ability to survive without him, maybe you go out and you get somebody else who you feel can make your defensive line more stable from maybe a defensive ability. He's more of a stay-at-home guy instead of a offensive threat. Or maybe you go out and you get another forward who changes the game for you as well. You never know. I mean, Gostisbehere is eating up a lot of salary to be a seventh defenseman or a sixth defenseman, so that's what makes me think that there's definitely a shot that his name comes up over the offseason in some form of trade discussion or something like that, because they've seen what they can do without him, and when he came back in for one game, which was the New Jersey game, and looked okay, but not nearly strong enough that they were able to. Everybody kind of looked bad in that game, so it was really hard to judge him as a good player. But he had a bad turnover at the blue line that led to a breakaway goal. So he's still having those mistakes that are coming back to haunt you from a defensive standpoint. And they switched that pairing out again for the very next game, and they went out and they rolled against Washington. So it's kind of that's just, I think, the way it has been with Robert Haig in the lineup. There's a comfort and there's stability, and they're protecting the back end, and they're doing what I think they've set out to do all season, which is cut down on the goals against. And if Gostisbehere isn't really helping that formula, I know as great as his offensive ability is and as infatuated as everybody is with his offensive ability, he's a guy I think you're starting to see what life without is like.
He's at Kevin_Durso. A couple more for you tonight. Flyers and the Panthers. 97.3 ESPN's coverage will begin after high school basketball. Flyers 8-3-1 in their last 12, so they have played pretty well. I mean, it's like that's not to ask them they got to play better. They have played pretty well, but how much at this stage of the season you watched? Again, Kevin, you see most of the practices and games. Not having Lindblom and Patrick at all this year, essentially, and how much has that kind of, I don't want to say caught up to them. As I just said, they're playing well, but how much could that have possibly made them firmly into a playoff spot as opposed to chasing a playoff spot?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's really hard to say with Patrick's case since he hasn't played at all this year. So realistically, there's nothing to compare it to. But I do feel like we do come back to Oscar Lindblom a lot, and given his situation, it's not really something that you want to think about because obviously his health is the most important thing. But I do remember, go back to the early games of this season when the Flyers were playing in some of these competitive games. They were having success, but Lindblom was one of the top offensive players on the team, and where I think it caught up to them more was not necessarily from the offensive side, but from the defensive side. This is the guy who was killing penalties. He was really good two-way, and they were able to just kind of establish a top six that didn't really need much changing at all. And when he went out of the lineup with the diagnosis that he had, it really changed things up, and they had to kind of get creative about how they were going to fill that void, more from a defensive side than an offensive side. I think that Joel Farabee's kind of started to come into his own. Obviously, I think the sky is the limit with him. It's only his rookie year. He's only got maybe 40 games to his credit so far, that, given the amount of time he spent in the minors or a little bit of time out with injury. So he's got loads of potential, and he could be a guy who fits into that top six down the road for good. But you really had to ask a lot out of a 19-year-old kid to fill the void of an established player who was really on his way to having a career season. Lindblom was definitely putting up career numbers at the start of the year, and he was on pace for great things. So I do think that they missed that a little bit, obviously, but I think they've done a pretty good job of trying to pull all the right strings. I think when you think about the additions of some of the guys they brought up from the minors, Farabee's obviously been really good this year. I think Nicolas Aube-Kubel is an underrated player on the team. He's really filled in and done some things offensively that have been impressive, but he has brought a little bit of that defensive balance back as well. And I think that that's a huge thing for this team because it doesn't look like they've suffered terribly in terms of the numbers of goals they give up or the number of goals they're able to score. I think they've kept, by keeping that differential on the positive side with consistency, they've been able to show they can stay competitive in games and win games and do it without two forwards who people thought were going to be very key parts to this season.
We'll leave you with this. I mean, we mentioned right before you jumped on, Kevin, if it's the new playoffs have been around for about 5 years now, so it's not like it's shockingly new, but the Metro is definitively a stronger division than the Atlantic, and quite frankly, than any other division in hockey. I mean, 69 points. If the Flyers were in the Pacific, they would be leading the Pacific right now with Vancouver. So do you like this wild card setup and the three teams from each? I mean, is that something that is beneficial? Do you not like it? Because realistically, you get three teams in your conference or in your division, and no matter how good they are.
Yeah, and I think there's benefits to it from a regular season standpoint because I think it does make the regular season a lot more competitive. I think it's significant that every year that since this has been in place, we've come down the stretch here with games that the Flyers are playing or any other team that's in the same position as the Flyers, and every game matters basically from the start of late January, early February on. And that's, I think, what the league was going for. Where I don't like it is what happens once the teams make the playoffs. You get these situations where the top two teams in a conference may be, I think right now, if the season ended today, the top two teams in the Eastern Conference are technically the Boston Bruins and Tampa Bay Lightning, who both play out of the Atlantic, and the top two teams in the Western Conference both play out of the Central, and that would be the Colorado Avalanche and the St. Louis Blues. Well, those two teams who are the top two in their conference can't play in the conference finals. They would meet in a second round series because of the way that they do the playoff structure. And I kind of think that's ridiculous that if these two teams have been the two best throughout the entire season and proved it through the regular season, that shouldn't they be the last two teams to play each other when the conference finals rolls around? I think they should, and I think it robs fans from getting a really good viewing experience where these two division rivals could be facing each other in a spot where they should be, which is the conference finals, and not necessarily the second round where there's still another series to go. And you might get a team that's significantly less talented on paper than the team that won the division and rolled to the division title. So that's where I don't like it. I do think it definitely makes the regular season a lot more competitive, but I'm definitely not a fan of what it does once the playoffs arrive and you get maybe the first round. It works because you get the two wildcard teams playing the division leaders. It makes a lot of sense in that sense. But as soon as you get to the second round and you've got two teams right at the top of their division that battled and maybe you have the two best records in the conference playing each other, I don't like that.
He's Kevin Durso. You can follow him at Kevin_Durso for the Flyers. Of course, 26, I think, games left to go. 25, 26 games left down the stretch. Got the the trade deadline coming up on the 24th. So a lot to do before the playoffs, and hopefully the Flyers are getting back to the playoffs. And Kevin will keep you up to date on that at Kevin_Durso. Thank you, pal.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Kevin, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.